Hi, Neil Luehring here with Anglers Covey. We told you last month that this month's fly of the month was going to be a yellow Sally, and I have kind of an experimental pattern I've been working with. I've pretty well got it perfected at this point in time, but I think it's a good exercise not only in tying a simple fly to represent something, but using your materials to do a good job of representing that bug. So there's only about 3 or 4 materials in there. We'll go through those as we tie the fly. It's a pretty simple little bug, but you can see from the picture here, I'm assuming the fly's in the picture here, okay. It's got that really down profile, and that's what you see with these yellow Sallies when you're out on the river. And I have to say that when I'm fishing out there, there's a lot of times I don't really see a yellow Sally hatch, so to speak. What happens is I'll be sitting there, all of a sudden I notice there's one on my clothing, or I'll start seeing some splashy rises, but I can't say that I ever really noticed the hatch itself occurring. So it's one of those times where observation is really a key to seeing what's going on in the river. And usually if they're out there and you're seeing some of those splashy rises, it's time to put one on, because the fish they're hitting them, and they're hitting them pretty hard. So let's get into it. We'll tie the pattern here, and we'll talk about the process as we go along. Alright, so let's tie the pattern. So I'm putting in the vise here a standard Tiemco 100 dry fly hook. A lot of times I'll set mine just a little bit up. Level to pretty close to it is always good. Thread I'm using is a uni thread, and this one is an olive. Dun color, 8/0, which is what I tie most of my dry flies with. Alright, so when you start this thread, you want to come in here, and this is true for all your flies. You always want to fill in that little gap right behind the eye where the metal comes around and it doesn't quite touch the shank. So fill that in. When you go to tie your knot at the end, you'll be grateful that you did that, because it won't get caught in that and fray that thread. And we want to bring it back approximately in line with the point of the barb. This is actually a pretty simple little fly to tie. So for the body, we're going to use just a UV2, just a golden stone. It's a dry dubbing. A lot of the patterns are pretty bright yellow in this. I prefer to go more to the amber side with the ones that I tie. Sometimes when I'm fishing this hatch, I'll just tie an amber elk-tailed caddis, and that works pretty well sometimes. It doesn't give you quite the same profile that we're going to get out of this fly when it's done. So that's the reason for the innovation with it. Alright, so I'm going to take a little bit of dubbing here. I always take my dubbing like this, and I pull it apart, and I fold it back over like that. See the nice little wispy ends that it gives me there? And what that does, it allows me to dub the back parts of the fly, or the first parts of the fly, very thin. Alright? A lot of people put their dubbing down, or their thread down when they're dubbing it. I don't know why. For some reason I started putting it up like this many years ago, and the idea stuck. Alright, so we want to wrap this body with the taper. Now notice I didn't cut that piece out, because I'm going to use it for the ribbing on the fly, the body of the fly. If you notice there, what I did was I wrapped up just a little bit and then back, and what that does is it locks that point in so that body won't slide forward on you with your flies when you tie them that way. Sometimes if you just tie it one direction, it can slide back up. You want to cover about 2/3 of the hook and taper that body a little bit with that dubbing. I want just a touch more on there. So I'll add just a little. Blend that in. Alright, well, we're going to tie kind of a bigger thorax on this fly, so we want to do that. So I'm just going to take this thread, and I'm going to rib the back part of the fly with that olive thread. And the reason I do that is when you look at the adult little golden stones, or little yellow Sallies, they have kind of an olive and a dun cast to them or whatever. So when I worked on creating this pattern, I tried to incorporate all of those things in there. So I'm going to bring the thread right back up to the eye of the fly. And I'm just going to use some standard yearling elk hair here for the wing on it. And this is probably the hardest part of tying this fly right here. Is number one is how much elk do I take? So that's probably way too much, but the reality is I'm going to take this stuff and I'm going to start working all of this fine and fuzzy stuff out of there. See how I'm kind of rolling my fingers back like that to get rid of all those things. So I want all that stuff out of there so that this hair stacks well when I put it in my hair stacker. So let's put it in a little hair stacker here. Always sounds like somebody's at the door, right? All right, so here's a little trick too. When you take the hair out of your hair stacker, think about which way you're going to tie that hair in. Normally we tie a wing back this way on most of our flies, right? But in this case, I'm going to point the tips out this way. So if I take it out of the hair stacker that way, I'm not manipulating it as much, and I'm not as apt to mess it up. So if I take and I hold this even with the eye, the tips of it even with the eye, I want about 1.5 times that hook shank for the length of that hair. So I'm going to bring it up here, and I'm going to throw a couple of wraps over it, and I don't, notice I didn't pull them real tight. If I pull them real tight, it's really going to flare that hair out, and I don't want it to do that. So I'm going to set it loosely. I'm going to come in here and clip it, and it's going to move around a little bit on you. Don't get too worried about that. All right, and then I'm going to tie all of that down and secure it really, really well. I just want to make sure that I'm clearing that eye well before I do this next step. All looks good. All right. So the next part is tying in the hackle. You can use either a grizzly or a blue dun on this. And you want to go a little bit small on the size. So I'm tying a 16 here. I would probably put a hackle on here. Not probably, I'm going to put on here a hackle that's about a size 20 or so. It doesn't need to be a real big hackle. If you guys have been watching some of my videos lately, you know that I do my hackles backwards. So I'm going to tie that in, and I'm going to bring the thread back to the base of the body there. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to wrap this hackle. I'm going to put about 4 or 5 good twists of that hackle. I'm going to hide all those little hair ends that are in there. All right, and then I'm going to tie this off with a couple of wraps right there. All right, so I'm going to take this wing, and honestly it takes a little bit of practice here to get that wing length right. You'll probably miss it 2 or 3 times. So I'm pulling the wing down. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to trim the hackle on top of the fly like that. And what that does is it keeps those, when I fold this wing back over, all of those little hair pieces are not errant on it. All right, so work that stuff around a little bit, push it back on that wing. All right, so we're going to come over that wing. I'm going to tie it a couple of times. We'll get the hackle out of the way. You got a couple of little short guys, I try to always get those out of there, but there's always a couple that hide. All right, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to spiral out through that hackle and over that thorax with the thread to set that longer thorax so that it has more of that stonefly look to it. All right, so I'm going to take my whip finisher here, and I'm going to tie that knot off right at the very head of the fly. Pull it down. Do my little push cut. I can also push cut this, or I can very carefully reach up there and snip that out of there like that. And then I like to take and kind of push that wing around a little bit so that there's shoulders, so to speak, down here on the side, so when it's sitting on the water it kind of rests on the edges of the wing, and that it's not just the body, but the wing is really what gives it its flotation. So let's give him just a little trim job here. All right, so this one I can't say that I've totally perfected it right, but it's well on its way. And you know, you can try different colors. There are different colors on different rivers. Some of the rivers you'll find brighter flies than you will on others. It's not a bad idea to tie some of them with maybe a little brighter yellow, but I prefer that amber color on the ones that I use myself. So you can see from tying the fly, probably the hardest part of this, and it's true for most dry flies, is the proportions of the fly. So play with it a little bit. You could tie this thing with a foam body. You could tie it with a brighter yellow body. You can change it around. Think of it as, again, I think I spoke previously in one of my flies about being kind of a platform. So this is kind of a platform that you can use to tie a little dry stone like this. Anyway, give it a shot. If you find something that works better than what I've got here, send us a comment. I'd love to hear it. So anyway, I hope you get a chance to tie a few, and I hope that they work for you.